Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tonellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by Hachette Australia. Listeners, you may have heard of my next guest author, Hilde Hinton, before. Not only is Hilde a best-selling author of 3 novels, but big sister to Connie and Samuel Johnson. A one-time prison officer and second-hand bookseller, a mother and carer of people in need of temporary housing and support, Hilde's stories are filled with the kinds of characters that reflect her larger-than-life experiences, and her writing is infused with empathy and insight into the impact of grief, loneliness and trauma. This year, Hilde's 3rd novel, The Opposite of Lonely, was released by Hachette Australia. It's a deeply moving book in which Hilde puts her finger on the pulse of modern Australian society, exposing the tender underbelly of the most vulnerable members of our community and showing that what we need most is often right in front of us. A beautifully written story about friendship, motherhood, family, and the quiet strength of ordinary people that will stay with you long after you've finished reading it. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to chat with Hilde about The Opposite of Lonely for the podcast today. Welcome back, Hilde.
Oh, thanks for having me, and what a lovely introduction.
It's my pleasure. And as I said to you before we started recording, I can't quite believe that it's been 3 years since we last chatted.
Yeah. Well, I needed a break after my last book, and I really enjoyed that, and it gave me a lot of thinking time to get the next characters in my head, which are Rose and Ellie from this book.
Yeah. Speaking of which, congratulations. This is a marvelous book, as I've just mentioned in my introduction, and it's been out since the end of April. So I guess I wanted to ask you, what's the reception been like so far? Is it landing with readers the way that you'd hoped it would?
Yeah, definitely. And as always, talking to people who've read it, it's always interesting to get other people's take on it because once the book's out there, it stops becoming the author's story and it becomes the story to the reader. So it's interesting seeing the different perspectives and what people have got out of the book. Yeah, it's been great to hear.
And I guess I'm fascinated by the premise of the book, which I think at its heart is about female friendship. So, what was the spark of inspiration for writing this story?
Well, I just really wanted to talk about the intimacy of friendship because friendship gives you just gain so much courage from your friends and you're able to take life risks because they're there by your side, protecting you, being honest with you, boosting you up. It's just one of the pleasures of life, I think, friendship. And I really wanted to hone in on what it can bring, particularly when I think as people, we tend to self isolate a bit when things happen. And Rose has had a relationship breakdown and her father's died, and she's a single mum, and she sort of slowly isolated after a confluence of these events. And meeting her friend Ali sort of does those things I was talking about and lifted her up and sort of gave her courage to get back to it, really, pick herself up by her bootstraps. And I just think the value of friendship deserved to have a spotlight on it.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Rose is in quite a bad place when we meet her, and she's clearly suffering depression and she's really disengaged from her life. You know, as you said, she's a single mum and she's had this breakdown of her marriage to Stephen. And despite having this gorgeous little boy, Max, and some other people in her life who truly care for her, she's really, she's not participating in life other than sort of, the very basics. And so, as you say, Ellie comes into Rose's life at that really opportune time. And I guess she gives her that impetus and confidence to kind of re engage, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does. And also teaches her to engage with her son on a different level because Rose is literally just going through the motions. And I think we've all been like that. I wanted to sort of touch on motherhood from a perspective. Not every single person is a natural mother. I wasn't myself. And I wanted to sort of normalize those feelings that, when you have a baby, sometimes you're just not automatically in love with your child. And sometimes it's a slow build and sometimes it takes work. and you sort of get there together with your child. But I wanted to sort of normalize that. So when she meets Ali, she's doing a good job and she knows she thinks maybe she could do a little bit more. She struggles with communication with her son, Max, but she develops strategies. She's able to tell him tree stories, which are sort of little fables about life in general. So she can impart knowledge through story. So I think Ali really sort of gives her the opportunity to enjoy her son more as well.
And I must say, the friendship between Rose and Ellie really resonated with me in a deeply personal way. Female friendships, as you say, have the ability to lift you up. They give you the confidence sometimes that you're lacking, provide you with a support network in a way that family relationships and even your spouse sometimes can't provide for you. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that friendship?
Well, I guess they go on a journey together. So they meet, they write down a whole list of things that interest them. They want to expand their social circle, which are all things that really cement what a friendship is and give you an opportunity to get out there and do more. And then they sort of head off on a variety of adventures. But also, I think what can happen when you meet a friend at a vulnerable time in your life, especially a friend that's come into your life on the premise of helping you. You know, the book opens with, "Can I help you with that?" That's the very first sentence because Ellie wants to offer her some assistance when Rose is racing around a car park trying to find her keys. And I think any friendship that's based on being helped and being lifted up out of a bit of a slump can blind you a little bit to who that person is, whether the appearance of kindness is actual kindness. Not everybody's what they're sort of cracked up to be, I guess. And I think it's really interesting to talk about that side of friendship as well.
Absolutely. I want to come back to that a little bit more. But before we do that, Hildy, it kind of struck me in reading this book that we read a lot these days about the loneliness epidemic. And despite the
Yeah.
world feeling smaller in so many ways and the ease with which people can connect with one another these days, especially online, we still have this pervasive problem of loneliness and social isolation, which is having such negative health effects on so many people. Why was this something you wanted to address in the novel?
Well, social disconnections just happening by the day. We're not having those conversations with strangers the way we used to. People in general are shutting themselves in a lot more. You know, there's less kids out on the street kicking the footy, yelling out car when a car comes. You don't hear those sort of sounds anymore. People are operating within their own properties. And I think conversations with strangers is a really important part of our social fabric. We're not getting them at the supermarket when we self checkout. I checked into a hotel recently and they just had 6 pedestals on stands, and you type your name in and the key comes out. Petrol stations now, if you notice inside them, they're installing tap and goes where you just type in your number. We're losing point of sale, we're losing casual conversation in retail, we're losing casual conversations with neighbours, and I think this is all a part of being socially disconnected. And this is what our children are seeing. They're seeing this as normal. They don't remember a time when we used to do these things much more often. So I think social disconnection is leading to isolation, which potentially leads to loneliness. And it also, I think, adds to the vulnerability of people generally, because as you search for social connection, you're putting yourself on the line to be taken advantage of. And I think all this is very, very connected and quite sad.
I couldn't agree with you more. As you say, Rose's state, when we meet her, I think it makes her vulnerable to someone like Ellie. Ellie is everything Rose isn't in many ways. She's confident, she's
Mm.
outgoing, as mentioned earlier, and she comes into Rose's life at a time when things aren't looking so great. And she steps in, like you say, and she's there to help, and she makes Rose's life easier and brighter in many ways, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does. And Max's life, he comes out of his room a lot more. There's a lot more life in the house. I think at one point, Rose sort of feels the difference in her own lounge room. You know, it's worthwhile putting daffodils on the table, stuff like that, because it feels more like a home instead of a house. And there are some beautiful scenes watching Rose come out of her shell and really embrace love and life.
I don't think it's a spoiler to say that Ellie's friendship is not without its problems for Rose. And I wondered if you could talk us through the sort of toxic traits of Ellie's presence in Rose and Max's life and why really Rose was unable to see any of it.
Yeah, well, it was also subtle, really. She drops the odd comment and then amends it immediately. So she sort of drops a bomb, like she accuses Rose of having a little life and then changes tack so it sounded like it was a reasonable thing to say. So she sort of puts Rose down a little bit, but Rose can't see it because she's generally being uplifted. I can't sort of go into the twist at the end, but what I can say is I wanted to explore, and I think most of us have had friends that have just been so valuable in our lives. But on occasion, there can be some form of betrayal or feeling let down. And the irony is that the very person that's either betrayed you or let you down is the person that's built you up to the point that you can actually cope with it. And I think that's a really good irony because that means the friendship had value regardless of its end. So I sort of wanted to explore that as well as the vulnerability of social isolation. And yeah, so what brings you up, what goes up must come down, sort of thing was the general concept. But I won't go too far into it because I don't want to give any spoilers.
I guess while you were talking, it reminded me of that old adage that, friends come into your life for a reason or a season. You can benefit from a relationship even if it's not really a long-term one.
You can. And the beauty with friendships, because I think when you first meet a partner, you're wanting them to see the best of you. So you're sort of presenting a side of yourself. You're not presenting all of yourself. But when you meet a friend, everything's out on the table. Every thought comes out. It's all just vomited out there. Your history, your feelings. In actual fact, when you think about it, it's a very vulnerable thing to do. You literally spit everything out. You don't hold anything back. So it has a very special place in our lives, friendship. You're right that you perhaps can't get from a partner because even though, I mean, obviously partners know you in a different way, but the intimacy of friendship with no holds barred ever, and you don't really hold back to try and protect their feelings either. Do you know what I mean? It's very open and honest in lots of ways. I mean, you don't go overboard and deliberately hurt people's feelings, but you can challenge friends in a way that you can't anybody else.
I kind of want to go back to this idea of vulnerability being a bit of a fallout from the loneliness epidemic. And, there's people out there who are so desperate for connection that they often let their guard down. And I guess and you can tell me if this is too long a bow to draw or, this is something we can't talk about. But I was watching a 60 Minutes feature last night and was horrified at the rising incidence of technology facilitated violence against women. And this isn't what this book is about at all, but it sort of spoke to me in terms of vulnerability and this need, people seeking connection at almost any cost, really. And at one point, a mother of a child who fell victim to an online predator said something along the lines of, "We spend a fortune each year protecting our homes with locks, security systems, etc. But with devices in in the hands of our teenagers or other vulnerable people, the most dangerous people are already in the bedroom with a click of a button or a swipe of an app." How do we counter this danger that vulnerable people are so sort of, are able to let their guard down and don't see people for who they really are?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the solution for that problem. I think it's a worldwide epidemic. The news stories we're hearing are growing by the day. There's consistently sort of people, it's not just women, it's also old people. People are taking advantage of older people. But I think the bottom line is it's taking advantage of the people who are vulnerable for want of social connection. And that includes our teenagers. As our teenagers, and rightly so, drift away from parents because they've got to go and find their own way. They have to go somewhere. And it's much easier to go into the device than it is to sort of do it the way we used to by walking the streets and meeting people. So I don't know how to stop it, but I think certainly as families, we can have screen-free time. We can have lock boxes for our phone. We can eat dinner together no matter what. We can just do those small things that remind people in our house that are often in different rooms on devices and just let them know that they're loved, they're supported, and that they've got ears in real life around them in the home. And it's not easy getting your kids off devices. I had very set rules that were time framed, but that's not necessarily easier. And my boys are in their 20s now, and I think it's even more difficult now. But I think we need to take a stand. It's our responsibility as parents to set boundaries, make a stance, get out board games, do activities that don't involve even television. Because the bottom line is, and it's hard work spending time, especially with young children, on that level. It's much easier to put a screen in front of them. If you're out for dinner, no screens. Kids have to learn to sit there and listen and enjoy the social experience. So I think really, although I don't have some sort of overarching solution to anything, I just think consideration, giving people our time is going to contribute to the people around us seeing the value of real life connection.
We do get a little bit of insight into Ellie's character through Rose's little boy, Max, and a more delightful character I can't think of. He's a sensitive and thoughtful little boy who is loath to upset his mother in any way. And you've actually written part of the narrative from his perspective, which I thoroughly enjoyed. So tell me about Max and what sort of themes and issues did you want to explore through his character and point of view?
Yeah, I think I love doing the perspective of the mind of a child. I'm fascinated with children. I find their lack of choice is really quite difficult. We tell them when to eat, what to eat, how much to eat, where to go, what time to do this, brush your teeth, it's 7:30, do this. There's not a lot of choice. And, I noticed with my boys when they were growing up, they'd sort of steel themselves and get ready and prepare when they wanted to come and ask for something, even if it was to go to a friend's house or go to the shop and get an ice cream. It didn't matter what it was. They did this sort of big preparation routine because there was this perception in their mind that if they ask the right way, they're more likely to get a yes. And their lack of agency is not something we talk about very often. But I think it's worth a thought. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to do the perspective from Max's point of view. There's a particular thread through Max's narrative where he used to love cooking with his mum. And his mum let him used to sort of really participate and actually help. He was allowed to crack an egg. She didn't do it because it was easier. She let him do these things. And then he burned his hand one day. And what happened is she stopped letting him help and just let him do fetching and things like that. So he just stopped participating altogether. And he really missed doing that with Rose, but didn't know how to bring it up. So I wanted to sort of highlight perhaps the lack of choice, the lack of agency, and the sort of frightened nature of children to speak up, which is obviously a byproduct of lack of choice and that sort of thing. So I just sort of wanted to highlight that. He's a great little kid. He wants the best for his mum, but he's just doing what kids do, which is just being so cautious about what to talk about and when. Yeah, it's a real sort of happy, sad, sort of beautiful part of the book, the story from Max's perspective. And to be honest, it planted a seed a long time ago. I'd been a prison officer for a few years, and my nephew said to me, this is after 3 years, said to me, so in your job, do you hit people on the head with black sticks? And obviously some cartoon or some sort of social reference to a prison officer where they've had a baton or something and hit a criminal. I don't know where it came from, but probably a Looney Tunes, right? And I thought, wow, for 3 years, that kid thought that was my job. And he didn't say anything for that length of time. And I just think that's a real life example of how we just assume knowledge in our kids. And it's amazing what they think because they haven't been sort of given alternate explanations. And it's tough for them to bring it up. So I guess that was a fairly long and convoluted answer. But that's why I wanted to do the perspective from Max's point of view, just to highlight those little things I've picked up over the years that I think are interesting things to think about as adults.
I loved it so much. And I thought it was incredibly insightful into the way kids do think. And it made me think of my own kids and the way they exactly what you said. They used to steel themselves to come and ask for something. You
Yeah,
could see it on their face. They wanted to say it, but they were frightened of the answer.
I put a lot of thought into those chapters, and I mean, I think Max is pretty much my favourite character in the book. Really, yeah.
Now, another delightful character, I have to say, is Rose's mother in law, Audrey. Despite her son's marriage breakdown, was keen to keep her connection with Rose and with Max very much alive, but she was also very mindful of Rose's boundaries, wasn't she?
I mean, it's a precarious position being a mother-in-law, isn't it? I think particularly probably being the male, like the dad's mother, because if the relationship with, from a mother-in-law's perspective, if the relationship with the daughter-in-law becomes strained, or if there's a relationship breakdown, it's going to affect you seeing that child. And it's a bit of a tightrope, I think, in general for grandparents because they've got to do what the kids we were just discussing with the kids. They've got to sort of be careful and make sure, they're a little bit eggshelly. And so she's very respectful of Rose's boundaries, but she's always there for Rose. And I really love Audrey. She was developed, yeah. So the mother of my son's dad, when the kids were little, said to me, you never really had a mum, and that was never role modeled to you, but I want you to know you're doing a really good job. And at that time, that statement just blew my mind. I just cried. And although it didn't sort of blossom into a relationship that Rose and Audrey have. Just the potential of that statement and the power of somebody in that role to impart wisdom and kindness, I really wanted to portray in Audrey, and also highlight the value of older people in our lives. They've got experience, they've been through it all. They've been through all the emotions and experience, and they've got an outlook that I personally respect and think that perhaps we can be a bit dismissive of our old people. And Audrey, I wanted to sort of highlight the wonderful impact people of that generation can have in our lives.
Yeah, and you've done a wonderful job with that because I mean, I was thinking to myself, mothers in law around the world could take a leaf from Audrey's book. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that true? And there are many, many wonderful Audreys in this world. And if anybody's struggling sort of with their daughters in law, then reading about Audrey could certainly provide some positive material.
Indeed, it can. The other thing that I really liked about Audrey was that she had some especially sage advice for Max. And you talked earlier about kids not being able to, perhaps communicate effectively with their parents and they're scared to for all sorts of reasons. And Max found it hard to communicate with his mother, but Audrey gave him a solution, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. And I think the beauty with nanas and grandparents and grandpas is they've got a little bit more time. They're not so rushed. So parents are doing the day-to-day grind on top of having quality time with their kids. And for the older generation, generally speaking, have more time on their hands. And because they don't have the child full time, they've got the time and patience to really slow things down, let the child go at their own pace communication wise, because there's nothing really pressing that's getting in the from a day-to-day perspective that's getting in the way. So Audrey sort of consciously waits for Max to talk instead of trying to draw things out of Max. It's a bit like when I had kids, I always found the car was a great time to find out what was really going on, because you couldn't get out of the car. And if you just wait long enough, the kids start talking, especially if they're off their screens, which is going back to what we were saying earlier. I never allowed screens in the car, which meant car trips can be a bit harder. The boys still reflect on those car trips. So I guess that's the sort of quality of time and patience that older people can bring, or people one step removed, that it's a bit hard to do as parents.
And as someone whose children benefited enormously from the relationship with their grandparents, I can absolutely attest to that and the value and the wisdom that grandparents bring into the lives of their grandchildren.
Yeah, there should be Grandparents' Day, I reckon.
You mentioned earlier that Rose would tell Max tree stories, and I found these tree stories absolutely fascinating. Now, were they based on something that you've used in the past or, with your own children, or were they fictional and created specifically for the purpose of this book?
Well, I say in the acknowledgements in the book, I thank somebody for telling me a tree story. They mentioned a story sort of a bit similar to the one Rose reflects back on in her childhood with a tomahawk and a tree. And what happened was, as he was telling the story at the end of it, he said, and trees take a long time to heal. And for some reason, I just started reading books about trees. I think The Secret Life of Trees by Peter Wallerburn was the first one I read. And basically, it talks about the interconnectedness of trees. So trees have underground communication systems, which is created by fungi actually. And so they're able to tell each other that they're sick, which can enable other trees to photosynthesize on their behalf and sort of send them nutrients from under the ground. Only 2% of saplings survive. Young trees understand they need the light, so they try to reach for it. And in doing that, they break their structure. But the young trees that trust the bigger trees to sort of do that on their behalf tend to be strong and grow up. And it was really interesting sort of reading all about trees. And as I was reading them, I was sort of going into fantasy land about, I mean, yes, they communicate. They don't talk like us or anything like that, but they've got so many human qualities. And, trees don't like to be alone, just like humans. They thrive in a community. And I just thought it was a really interesting, yeah, it was an interesting rabbit warren to go down and sort of learn about the communication and relationship between trees. And I thought they made really great fables, because if Rose can't, she doesn't know how to talk to Max, but she can say tree stories that send him messages of support, of knowledge. And I just think it was a really delicate sort of touch in the book. Yeah, I really like those tree stories. And I really loved getting to know trees and going to the Arboretum in Canberra and Yeah, that was just great fun. So, yeah, Peter Wallerburn, if ever you want to read a book about trees, it's fantastic.
It kind of made me want to press this book and perhaps, The Secret Life of Trees into my children's hands, because the stories that Rose was telling Max really kind of acted as a
Yeah,
metaphor for life, really. Messages that she couldn't really impart to him in any other way.
that's right. And he has done a children's version of that book. So feel free to grab that for your kids. It's just terrific. And I also think, with things going the way they are, I think it's important for us to all have a bit of an understanding of the world around us, nature wise.
Absolutely. Now, Hildy, I started reading your book on audio and I was delighted to learn that you, in fact, recorded the audiobook yourself. So I wanted to ask you, how was
Yeah.
that experience? And was that something you actually wanted to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to do it. Having recorded my other books as well, it's a really good experience to read out loud before I now know, because when you read the book out loud, it exposes flaws or misplaced commas, things that don't happen when you read with your eye. So even before I handed this book in, I did read it out loud to myself, thinking it would give me the same benefit as doing the audiobook. And it was definitely helpful, but doing the audiobook, definitely there were a few things I missed. Yeah, so I just really enjoyed that experience because it was a way of getting to know the book in a different way than I already knew it. Yeah, it's such a privilege to be able to do that, and yeah, I'm glad you glad you gave it a listen.
If there was one thing that you would like readers to take away from this book, what would that be?
Well, I guess it's always a bit hard because people will get what they sort of get individually out of it. But I think the power of kindness, small acts of kindness, random acts of kindness, thinking about what more we could do socially with the people in our lives. I just think in general, it's just a bit of a make sure you love the ones you're with kind of message, I guess. Not take people for granted and perhaps see, just take a second longer when you're thinking or interacting with people, but with your friends and your family, because often there are little signs there of things maybe that people want to talk about, and we just rush through it because we're always in a hurry. We've got more time than we think we do. And I think really this book's about appreciating the people around you and being kind to them.
Hildy, the last time we chatted, I asked you about the fact that for a long time you avoided being a writer, but you now
Mm.
have 3 books under your belt. So I guess it begs the question, have you settled into the idea of being a career novelist, or do you only write when the inspiration strikes you?
Yeah, I certainly, even when I embarked on my first published book, I wrote a book when I was in my 20s and then turned my back on writing. I mean, when this one arrived in the mail, I sort of took it out of the box and couldn't believe I've done it again. I just still got a bit of imposter syndrome. I still can't believe that I'm, writing books. And I've already got the idea for the next one. And I've started on that, with all the little post-it notes everywhere about who my characters are and what they're going to do. And I think I'm close to the point of accepting that I can pretty much call myself an author now. Yeah, maybe one more.
I think you most definitely can call yourself an author. Absolutely. With pride.
Oh, thank you. It's certainly it's become a bit of a compulsion. I don't know how not to do it anymore. And doing it
No.
late, for anybody out there, it's okay to start late. It's, yeah, never too late to start on something that you've always thought about. Yeah, I'm really glad I took the plunge. Yeah, I highly recommend it to anybody else.
Talking about advice, what advice would you offer aspiring authors out there?
Well, this is probably going to sound a bit harsh. I've got two things. The first one is just do it. People spend a lot of time thinking about doing it instead of just doing it. And the only way to do it is to put your bum on a chair and either pick up a pen or open your screen and just sit there for half an hour to an hour each day, even if you're not writing anything, because the only way to do it is to do it. And the other thing I'd say is, which is not quite so harsh, when you're writing, make sure you remember how you see. The way you see and who you are is integral to how you write. And if you try to change that or do something that's not sort of part of who you are, then it's not going to sound authentic and it's not going to have meaning. So don't forget how you see. Don't try to be this or try to be that or add a bit of fancy, or just make sure you remember how you see, because how you see is how you write.
You mentioned that you were working on something else. Is there anything you can tell us about it?
Well, it was born when I was at a party and I was watching a woman cut up capsicum into very precise, tiny little cubes. And I thought to myself, oh, what sort of person sort of does that and is so precise and yet so caring? And I sort of developed that character was born at that moment. So although it's not based on this woman at all, but the way she cut up capsicum, I thought I want my character to have the sort of life that has that sort of order and does things in that manner. And I thought it would be really interesting if she had a sister who was sort of wore linen and travelled a lot. So they were quite different characters. And Hazel, the capsicum cutter, is preparing for her daughter's 21st birthday party. And that's the basis, I guess, and it'll grow from there. So I think it's going to be really interesting looking into siblings because I've just done Friends. My other books are very much about sort of deep dives into single characters. So I think this time I'd like to really do a deep dive into siblings and, well, sisters in particular, because it's a very unique relationship and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, sounds fascinating. I can't wait to learn more.
Yeah, thank you.
Hildy, I absolutely loved this book. It's timely and it deals with an important social issue in a beautifully sensitive and heartwarming way. I know your fans are going to absolutely love it. And I wanted to say thank you so very much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading.